Welcome to Module 1. In this module, we're going to talk about what is debt, and we'll get into some specific examples with numbers, and we'll talk about some general examples of debt. So, what is debt? Well, when you don't have the cash in your pocket to go out and buy something that you want, you have to take on debt. You have to get that money from someone else. So essentially, you're borrowing money from someone. And in exchange for borrowing those funds, they're going to charge you for that. They're not just going to give it to you out of the kindness of their heart. They're going to charge you for that. And it's called interest. They charge you an interest rate. And interest is charged differently depending on the type of debt that you have. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So again, just you borrow money from someone, they charge you interest. Your interest rate is a huge component of debt, of what debt is. If you can somehow get a 0% interest rate, and sometimes that exists, sometimes on credit cards or sometimes on a brand new car, they'll give you 0%, which means you're just paying the payment of the debt of whatever the amount that you, what we call, financed or got the loan on. And that's great. You need to take advantage of those opportunities, and then we'll talk about how you manage that debt. You have to stay on top of that to keep your 0%. So let's talk about some examples of what debt actually looks like and why the interest rate is such a huge determining factor of if you should take on that debt or not. So here we show two loans. The first loan is for $35,000. So call it a car, call it a home equity loan, whatever the type of loan you want to call it. But it's for $35,000 in debt. You financed $35,000. And the interest rate is 4%, which is a pretty good interest rate right now. Now, in your first year, on $35,000, you will pay $1,400 in interest. So imagine what you could buy with $1,400. You're going to pay $1,400 just to get the 35 grand. So that's on top of the 35 grand. So think for a second, if you got a bill in the mail for $1,400, would that stress you out? Would that make you happy? Probably not super happy. $1,400 is a lot of money. And that's only 4%. Okay, second example. We now have the same $1,400 interest payment, but the interest percentage is 20%. What does this mean? 20% versus 4% means you could only borrow $7,000 for that same interest payment. You want to keep the interest payment dollars-wise the same, $1,400. But when you up that interest rate, this shows you how powerful an interest rate is. If your interest rate is 20%, that only allows you to borrow $7,000 versus $35,000. That's a huge difference. So your interest rate most certainly matters. Again, usually the higher interest rates are things like credit cards, mostly just credit cards. And then you'll have sometimes a higher interest rate maybe on a car loan or an unsecured loan or a business loan, things like that. But really credit cards are the highest interest rate items. And when we're talking about debt in general moving through this course, understand that interest rates are really going to be your number one factor. Of course, the term, there's always a term on debt. So you have to pay back this debt by a certain amount of time. That's called the term. So whether it be a 5-year car loan or the credit card, usually you have a 1-month period where you can pay back a payment of the debt. But there's always a term involved. And those terms determine how much over time you pay in interest. But your rate is going to determine how much in every payment you're paying towards your actual amount that you borrowed, your actual debt, and how much you're just paying in fees and interest towards the company for borrowing that debt. So let's recap real quick and then we'll move on to the next module. What is debt? Debt is the amount of money that you borrow, and in exchange for giving you those funds, whether it's Best Buy for a TV, whether it's a bank, whoever it is, in exchange for those funds that they're giving you, they charge you an interest rate. And your interest rate is going to determine your payment. Your interest rate and your term is going to determine your payment on your debt. So now that we know what debt is, in Module 2 we're going to get into How'd you get into debt? What are some of the major mistakes that people make to all of a sudden realize they're in a lot of debt? Let's move on.